The rain was relentless, hammering down on the windshield with a ferocity that turned the world into a blur of water and shadows. Hannah squinted, gripping the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white in the dim glow of the dashboard. The wipers thrashed back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the deluge. Her headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating only a few feet of the winding country road ahead. It was supposed to be a quick drive, just an hour to the small town where her sister lived. But the storm had turned the journey into an arduous, nerve-wracking ordeal. The road was deserted, the surrounding landscape swallowed by the night. Trees loomed on either side, their branches swaying like skeletal arms in the howling wind. Hannah shivered, though the car's heater was on full blast. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 9:13 p.m. She should have been there by now. A heavy sigh escaped her lips. She had left work late, trying to finish up a report that was due the next day. When she finally hit the road, the storm was already brewing, dark clouds gathering ominously overhead. Her sister, Emily, had called twice, worried about the weather. "You sure you want to drive in this?" Emily had asked, her voice crackling through the poor cell reception. "I'll be fine," Hannah had assured her, though she wasn't so sure now. Each mile seemed to stretch longer than the last, the rain growing heavier, the night darker. She hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour. The isolation was unnerving. As she rounded a sharp bend, a figure appeared in her headlights. Hannah slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the slick road. The figure stood motionless in the middle of the road, drenched and shivering. It was a woman, her long hair plastered to her face, her clothes clinging to her thin frame. Hannah's heart raced. She rolled down her window a crack, just enough to call out. "Are you okay?" she shouted over the roar of the rain. The woman didn't respond, didn't move. Hannah's unease grew. She couldn't just leave her there. With a resigned sigh, she pulled over to the side of the road and turned on her hazard lights. Grabbing her umbrella from the back seat, she stepped out into the storm. The rain immediately soaked through her clothes, the cold seeping into her bones. She hurried over to the woman, holding the umbrella over both of them. Up close, the woman looked even more pitiful. Her eyes were wide and vacant, her lips trembling. "Are you hurt?" Hannah asked, reaching out to touch her arm. The woman flinched, but didn't pull away. "Do you need a ride?" Slowly, the woman nodded. Hannah led her to the car, helping her into the passenger seat. She got back behind the wheel, cranking up the heat. The woman sat stiffly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What's your name?" Hannah asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "Lucy," the woman replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Where are you headed, Lucy?" "Anywhere but here," Lucy said, her eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror. Hannah followed her gaze, but saw only the rain-slicked road behind them. "Okay," Hannah said slowly. "I'm heading to Riverton. Is that okay?" Lucy nodded again, though she didn't seem to really register what Hannah had said. With a sigh, Hannah put the car in drive and continued down the road. The silence in the car was thick, punctuated only by the drumming of the rain and the rhythmic swish of the wipers. Hannah glanced at Lucy out of the corner of her eye. The woman stared straight ahead, her hands still clasped tightly in her lap. There was something off about her, something that made Hannah's skin prickle. But she pushed the feeling aside. The woman was clearly in distress. The least she could do was help her get somewhere safe. They drove for what felt like an eternity, the storm showing no signs of letting up. Hannah tried to make small talk, but Lucy's answers were short, her voice distant. Eventually, Hannah gave up, focusing on the treacherous road ahead. Suddenly, Lucy spoke, her voice sharp and urgent. "Turn here." Hannah looked over, confused. "What? There's no road?" "Turn here," Lucy insisted, her voice rising. Hannah hesitated but did as she was told, turning onto a narrow dirt path that she hadn't noticed before. The car bumped and jolted along the uneven ground, the headlights barely piercing the darkness. "Where are we going?" Hannah asked, her unease growing. "You'll see," Lucy replied cryptically, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The path wound through dense woods, the trees closing in around them. The storm seemed to intensify, the rain lashing against the car with renewed fury. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't like this. She didn't like this at all. Finally, they emerged into a clearing. In the center stood an old, dilapidated house, its windows dark and its roof sagging. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. Lucy unbuckled her seatbelt and turned to Hannah, her expression intense. "Thank you," she said, her voice eerily calm. "But you need to leave, now." "What? No, I can't leave you here," Hannah protested. "This place—" "Go!" Lucy shouted, her eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand, they're coming." Hannah's blood ran cold. "Who's coming?" But Lucy didn't answer. She jumped out of the car and ran towards the house, disappearing into the shadows. Hannah sat there, stunned and terrified. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But she couldn't just abandon Lucy. Cursing under her breath, Hannah turned off the car and grabbed her flashlight from the glove compartment. She stepped out into the rain, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. She followed Lucy's path, her heart pounding in her ears. The front door of the house hung ajar, creaking on its hinges. Hannah pushed it open and stepped inside, her flashlight casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. The air was thick with the smell of damp and decay. "Lucy," she called out, her voice trembling. "Lucy, where are you?" A faint sound came from upstairs, like the creak of a floorboard. Hannah swallowed hard and climbed the rickety staircase, the wood groaning under her weight. At the top, she found herself in a long hallway, doors lining either side. She checked each room, her flashlight revealing only dust and cobwebs. As she reached the last door, a chill ran down her spine. The door was slightly open, a dim light spilling out. She pushed it open with a trembling hand and stepped inside. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center. Lucy sat in the chair, her back to the door, her head bowed. Hannah rushed over, relief flooding through her. "Lucy, thank God, we need to get out of here," she said, grabbing her arm. Lucy's head snapped up, her eyes wide and unseeing. "It's too late," she whispered. "They're here." Before Hannah could react, the door slammed shut behind her. She spun around, her flashlight flickering. Shadows moved in the corners of the room, shapes forming and dissolving in the dim light. The temperature dropped, a bone-chilling cold seeping into the room. Hannah backed away, her flashlight beam shaking. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the room. "You shouldn't have come here," a voice rasped. "This place is cursed." Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you want?" she cried, her voice breaking. The shadows coalesced into a figure, tall and menacing. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, its mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "We want you," it said, its voice echoing in her mind. "You've entered our domain. Now you belong to us." Hannah stumbled back, her flashlight clattering to the floor. The figure advanced, its presence suffocating. Desperate, she turned to Lucy, but the woman was gone, the chair empty. "Lucy!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "Lucy, help me!" But there was no answer. The figure loomed over her, its eyes burning into her soul. "There is no escape," it whispered. "You are ours now." With a final, terrified scream, Hannah felt herself being pulled into the darkness, the world around her fading into nothingness. The last thing she heard was the sound of the rain, relentless and unyielding, as it washed away all traces of her existence. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun rose over the clearing, casting a pale light on the dilapidated house. Inside, all was silent. The rooms were empty, the air still and cold. On the old dirt road, a car sat abandoned, its doors open, its headlights dimmed. There was no sign of Hannah or Lucy. Only the rain-soaked earth bore witness to the horrors of the night before. In Riverton, Emily waited anxiously for her sister, unaware that she would never arrive. The small town continued its morning routine, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded in the storm. And in the woods, the house stood silent and forgotten, a dark presence lingering in its halls, waiting, watching, for the next unsuspecting traveler to wander into its grasp. The rain would come again, as it always did, and with it, the whispers in the darkness, the echoes of those who had been lost to the night. The house would stand, a sentinel of despair, its secrets buried in the shadows. Forever cursed, forever hungry. And the road would remain, winding through the woods, leading the unwary to their doom.